Today we're talking about Crash. No, not that one. This is the David Cronenberg film about a group of people who are so desensitized to regular pleasures that they get turned on by car crashes and near-death experiences. Yes, Cronenberg is going to make us talk about weird stuff, but we wouldn't have it any other way. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Is there more traffic than usual?
And it's not... I wanted to make a joke and call you David Spader. The joke being that I was mixing up James Spader and David Spade, because your name's David, but it wasn't that funny. I'm telling you anyway, though, because I spent like a whole 5 seconds on the thought process, and I'm not letting that go to waste, damn it.
You could have cured cancer in those 5 seconds, but I'm glad you spent it on that.
This is a movie podcast, everyone. We are working through 90s erotic thriller season here on the Collector's Cut. And we're still in 1996 with this particular movie. We're looking at David Cronenberg's Crash, not to be confused with the Oscar bait movie about fixing racism from 2005.
Do you even remember who the director of that is?
The director? No.
Yeah, like it's David Cronenberg's Crash, but like I couldn't even tell you who directed the other one.
No idea.
Paul Haggis.
Yep, I would never have pulled that out of my ass. Never.
Not at all.
So, yes, David Cronenberg's Crash. I guess to sum it up in a simple sentence, it's a movie about some people who get a fetish for cars, or more specifically, car accidents and injuries and things relating to that subject. And I'll just leave it there as far as the basic premise goes. But we'll start spoiler-free, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get into the spoilers. And of course, if you are enjoying the show, please do hit the like button on YouTube. It helps us out a bunch. And you can support the show and get bonus content. There's bonus shows you can get from us over on Patreon, but I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show. And I suppose, I probably should have said this at the start of every review this season, but just forewarning, there will be discussions of topics of a sexual nature in this episode.
You know, I can't remember where we said it in, but one of these movies we've already done, we specifically made the point of like, boy, this season's a lot less sex-filled than I expected it to be. Fix that in one movie.
This is probably got the most of any of the movies, but something I said last movie, and it's still true, and I thought it would still be true after this one, to be fair. I wasn't expecting this one to buck the trend that I spotted, but the trend that there is no trend, and that every single one of these so far has been wildly different, and nothing feels like it's doing the same thing. This is by far the weirdest one, it's by far the most sexual, and it's probably the one with the least thriller, although I would argue there is still a thriller. Like, it's more undertones of thriller rather than like, you know, there's a gangster with a gun and like, you know, that kind of danger. But there's definitely kind of a dark side to what's going on here that we'll like talk about when we're exploring it in spoilers. But
yeah, I mean, if you had told me to take up the bet of whether or not they were going to get any weirder or not, I wouldn't have said it went down when Cronenberg is attached to it. I think that's a pretty stupid bet to make.
Of course. I mean, even if all the ones we've done so far had all been quite samey, this would have been always the one that would have been different. But to be fair, they've all been pretty different from each other, and this is the 5th one we're doing, I think so. Yep. Yeah.
We got 8? Question mark?
No, 7. I think is the total amount.
7.
We got 2 left after this. But yeah, all right. David Cronenberg's Crash. I had never seen this. I want to say I saw like maybe 5 minutes of it on TV when I was a teenager.
What channel was playing what version of this movie?
I guarantee you it was Channel 4. But I mean, keep in mind, in the UK, after 9 p.m, you can show anything that's, you know, you can't show hardcore porn, but you can show anything that's up to an 18, which is, I'm pretty sure, what this was rated as in the UK. Which isn't get a stigma, because it got an NC-17 in the US, and NC-17 of course has the stigma of we're not showing that anywhere.
Oh yes, absolutely.
You have to specially order that, and you pervert. Like that's the attitude with that. But yeah, it's not weird, especially for a channel like Channel 4 to show like an edgier movie at like midnight. Like that was not that weird.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the basis of them just showing the movie, if it were just any random movie, I think it might be a little bit weird to show. But saying, oh no, we're showing a David Cronenberg film, I'd be like, all right, however weird it may get, I can at least justify you showing that.
Yeah. I remember, like, a formative bit of backstory here, I guess, but I remember watching a softcore Italian porn movie called Female Vampire on Channel 4 when I was, like, 13.
I have to see this now. 13, so what year would that have been putting it at?
2004. I mean, the movie was older than that, though. It was
older than that. All right.
It was, like, from the 70s or something, I think.
Oh, yeah, 1973, first result.
Yeah.
All right.
Was that a Franco movie?
Yes, Jesus Franco.
Yeah. I only remember that because I remember when I started getting into DVD collecting, like, I remember Anchor Bay putting out a Jesus Franco box set, and I remember going, wait, does he just make, like, softcore porn? Because it feels like that's what that movie was, but...
I'm looking at the filmography here, and 184 credits means there's gotta be some amount of softcore porn.
Anyway, that's just to say that, like, if they're showing that late night on a broadcast, not a cable channel, broadcast TV, then... yeah, Crash is fair game.
Yeah, anything goes.
Yeah, Crash is fair game. Anyway, so yes, I'd never seen this before. Was curious to finally check it off, especially since as I've gotten older, I've really come to appreciate a lot of Cronenberg's work more than any of the things that I'd seen when I was younger. That's not to say that all of them have worked for me. There's one or two that I definitely felt on, but by and large, there's a lot of them that I really like and appreciate more now that I'm older. How familiar are you with Cronenberg's filmography?
Like, not at all. I think if you go back over to the other show of The Ace, one of the earliest homework movies I did was for, I think it was Dead Zone?
Oh, the Dead Zone, yeah.
Yeah, which I think is him. And I think I made the point of saying this is pretty much one of the only Cronenberg films I've done up to this point. So add this onto the list. I'm at 2.
It's funny because the Dead Zone definitely still feels a bit Cronenberg-y in its style, but it's definitely probably one of the most tame movies that he's done. So that was quite a whiplash to go to that to this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know the history of him. Like, I know the vibe that is associated with the name Cronenberg, you know, with The Fly, especially being the one that I think is the most representative. When people think Cronenberg, they think that style. But when it comes down to it, the only actual exposing myself to him is this and Dead Zone.
You exposed yourself to David Cronenberg?
As soon as I said it, I was like, I should have paused and thought my words out instead of just trying to get the sentence out. But
I don't even think I'd care about it, except for in the context of this movie. It feels in theme to make that joke. So
yeah.
Dear, he'd probably just like stare at like a painting and start like think intently, and you'd be like, "What's he thinking about?"
I think he'd think it would be bland. I think he'd be like, "I've seen that 3 times since I woke up this morning. Whatever."
Your penis is too normal. I desire something more exquisite.
Yes, absolutely. That is fully what I expect from him.
All right. So yeah, I mean, the movie's about a movie producer, who James Spader plays.
Yes.
Also called James, funnily enough. I guess they just didn't want to get confused on set. We'll just call him James.
Well, apparently this is based off of a book that is written by J.G. Ballard, and the guy's name is James Ballard. So I have to assume it's a autobiographical tale to some extent.
Well, I don't know if I jumped to autobiography, but certainly I'll say he put his own name in there as I don't know, maybe he's living out a bit of a fantasy or something. He's like,
oh yeah, obviously.
Going to tell everyone about my fetish. But yeah, he's a movie producer, and he's in an open marriage with his wife, and they were both kind of trying to be sexually excited and failing. Well, I'll get into more details and spoilers, but suffice to say, things are a little bit dry in that front, despite clearly both of them being able to have sex quite easily, seemingly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's not like they're failing, they're just bored.
They're bored, yeah. It's just not doing it for them anymore. And he gets in a car accident, and that kind of propels us down a journey of discovery. And I'll just leave it there for spoiler free. David, what did you think of Crash?
Man, I don't friggin' know. It's okay, so it's not a typically structured movie. It does not have a solid plot that we are following of, like, you know, here's an end goal for our characters and here's what we're doing. It is much more of kind of a discovery of this community, of this underworld sort of aspect to it. It's self-discovery of like why these things are entertaining to them to some extent. And it's just kind of a slow boil as things like eventually build on each other and you get more and more extremes. If anything, it's a cautionary tale of exploring like dangerous things, whether it be drugs or like violence or anything like that. Even if it starts out in a small setting, you get that desire for more. You get that feeling that you need to chase a bigger high, and then it just builds and builds until tragedy eventually besets them.
I definitely got the parallels to an addiction and how it spreads and affects the people around you. That was definitely in there for sure.
There are definitely a few scenes like that. In terms of whether or not I enjoyed it, I get that there are these deeper themes going for it. I understand that there is a level of artistry to it, but I feel like a lot of it was, we're doing this for the sake of shock value. Like, the story could have been told without them going as far as they did in a lot of places. And as much as it is kind of poking at this idea of, oh, you know, addiction and whatever like that, it's a lot of stuff they did to be titillating. They did to get a rise out of people and like shock them in a lot of ways. And I felt it very difficult to engage with the movie as I was sitting there just going like, all right, well, I guess this scene's going to be going on for a while as they just continue to have sex all the time. And I don't know. I wanted there to either be a bit more depth to the exploration that they were going through, or I wanted it to go off the walls insane with the levels that they were doing the crazy stuff. Instead, it was, you know, shocking. It was weird, but it never felt like it got way extreme crazy that I was expecting it to build to, and it definitely didn't get to the depths of exploration as I was hoping for either. So it's a well-made film, I could recognize that, but ultimately I just had trouble engaging with it.
I think, and I mean this pun, and 100% I mean this.
Mm-hmm.
This movie is like watching a car crash, and you can't help but be kind of captivated and watch what these freaks, these perverts are doing, and like how they're driven to the next thing. Again, pun intended, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I do think it's well made. I think it's well directed. I think it feels very confident in its direction at all times. The one thing that I will disagree with in something you said there. Now, I'm not necessarily going to like argue that some of it's not for shock value, but the word that I'll disagree with is that it's titillating, because I actually don't think it is. I think one of the things this movie does is it kind of makes all of the sex feel a little bit clinical and disconnected, and it doesn't feel like, oh, you're watching it for arousal. You're kind of watching it just in awe of like how they're getting turned on, why they're doing this. It never feels like it is made to just excite the audience. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure some people picked up a new fetish watching this one, but for most of the audience, I don't think it has that effect. I think even just the world in general feels cold, it feels empty. And I think one of the big themes that the movie has, aside from the idea of it being this like addiction and the idea of chasing the greater pleasure and all that, and like the dangers of that, and how they disregard even the safety of people around them, because let's face it, their fetish at a certain point is putting innocent people at risk because they're driving dangerously and things like that. But I think the other big theme here is this idea of like, we're all just so stimulated all the time that it does become boring. And while it uses sex specifically in the movie, I think it's just kind of a broader look at the world and how colder it feels. And I think you know the quote you used at the start was, "Oh, does it look there's more traffic to you?" And I think that almost does kind of feel like the mundanity of the world, and like, oh, there's just more traffic. Like, what's less exciting to talk about than traffic? It's like the most boring thing. Like that and accounting, like those two things together is like, okay, just kill us all now. So I think that's a big part of it, is exploring kind of, there's like a body horror element to this, which there isn't a lot of Cronenberg. Here it's a bit more suggestive and symbolic rather than literal. But this idea of merging with like the vehicles as like, I think one of the things to keep in mind is this book was written like, you know, a good couple of decades before this. So I
think it was like 10, 15 years.
Yeah. So it's like, you know, the idea that vehicles are kind of like the pinnacle of what we've done in terms of like advancing the world kind of thing. And it's like it's basically the idea of like flesh merging with metal and all that kind of stuff.
It feels like if this were made 20 years later or whatever, we'd have some different sexualized version of like the Matrix or whatever, where we're talking about computers and whatnot. It feels like this is the sort of thing of cars being an extension of ourselves, and therefore, as with everything that humanity does, how do we do sex with it?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. But I think it works in the case that because it's the 90s. They could use computers in the plot if they wanted to, but that wouldn't be what the book was. And it certainly, I think cars they've been around long enough, right? Even at this point where they feel kind of cemented into society, it's just this everyday thing we don't even think about. But they are kind of like new in the grand scheme of things, and that if you just go back 100 years, you're in a time period where, they weren't a thing, right? They're just not there.
Ford Model T.
If that, well, I'm specifically thinking go back from 96. Obviously, if you go back for 100 years from now, you've got some early ones kind of kicking about, and you're sort of dodging the horse shit because it's still quite prominent on the streets. But
man, I loved watching like old timey footage of cars before there were any sort of road laws. It is chaos. Everyone's just like, move, swerve, get out of the way.
I just wonder how like hard it was for like some politician to be like, look, we have to regulate this. We have to have rules because it's.
I'm sure it was 100% based off of like some tragedy or something like that, where they're just like, this man was going down the road at an unacceptable 5 miles an hour.
But I
can't have that.
I'm just thinking about how America specifically like so many people are against any type of like gun laws being enforced, right? Mm-hmm. And I just imagine that if we were having this debate today, there'd be people who are like, no, you're not taking away my freedom. I'll drive however I damn well please. Like,
I wonder if the laws were particularly enacted before most of the common people had cars. So, like, the laws got put in place before most people were against, like, they were like, oh, it's not my freedom we're taking away that other guy's freedom.
Either that, or they realized how much money they could make off tickets, and that put forward a lot of laws.
That's true.
They saw money signs and thought, yes, this is how we'll do it. So, yeah, did I like the movie? I didn't really answer that yet. It's a weird one to answer. I think I did. I kind of did.
It's very convincing. I really like that.
It's a more complicated one to talk about because it's weirder, and it's like anything that is this kind of cerebral, indifferent, and weird. I don't know if like my opinion in the middle of the movie is quite a good indicator of how I feel once I've had like even just 10 minutes to sort of sit and think about what I just watched. And I think I like it more in like the aftermath and thinking about what it was actually doing perhaps than I did. And I will say though, the filmmaking is very good. The cinematography, the way that Cronenberg chooses to cover all of the action, and I mean that in every sense of the word, both the sex, and because of the premise of the movie, there is some stunt driving effectively. So compared to some of the other movies, it probably isn't higher budget than some of the ones we've done because they're more mainstream movies. But compared to like a low budget movie with a really erotic kind of thing going for it, this probably has a higher budget than most of that type, just because it's got cars and crashes and things happening like that. So
I don't see anything immediately listed in terms of budget, but it does say that the shooting script was like significantly trimmed down, and they specifically were like trying to cut back money of just spend a lot of time focused on the scene, like really zoom in, spend all the time on this specific point where we're at, and then we'll move on to the next thing.
Yeah. So as far as to talk about the cast here, James Spader is James. Our main character. I will say I was surprised watching it because Holly Hunter gets second billing, and I assumed that meant she was the second most important character, but I would put her at fourth probably.
Yeah, it's weird because there's definitely two characters that I would say are the leads, like are undeniably up there, but I would also say that other people may have very strong opinions as to who that would be.
Sure. I think, because I was kind of expecting the wife character to kind of like fade into the background, and instead, the new character in his life, Holly Hunter's character, after like some important introductory stuff and what she kind of introduces him to, she kind of fades away in the movie and isn't really a big part of it. Yep. And then Elias Koteas is in here, and he plays Vaughn, who's a very prominent character, who's very important. I would say him and the wife Catherine are easily more important than Holly Hunter's character in terms of screen time and like billing, and probably not even that far off James, to be honest. Like, James is kind of the vessel for the audience in a lot of ways, so he instantly gets a bit more screen time, but like those two characters are equally as important as him as far as like getting everything across, to be honest.
Yeah, I would honestly say that that's kind of indicative to what I feel like the book was. It was probably close to, as I was saying, an autobiographical style, where it's just someone recounting the stories that they gathered in this community as they explored it. And so, yeah, you're going to have people who float in and float back out, and like people who are crucial for a specific point in their life, but then as the stories progress, ultimately fade into the background. And that's kind of what Holly Hunter feels like here, where she's critical to kicking everything off in a lot of ways, but then she just sort of fades away as she becomes less and less important to the main plot.
Yeah, also worth mentioning, Rosanna Arquette's in this as not as an important character, but certainly a recurring character throughout. So
yeah, I wouldn't say important, but she does feel very iconic in a lot of ways. She feels like it's representing a lot of what this movie's going through.
People will remember her from this movie. She's very memorable. I mean, to be fair, there's a lot of memorable things about this movie. I don't think, if anything else, you can't say you're going to forget like some of the scenes in this.
Nope.
So, you know, give it credit where it's due. So yeah, cast is solid, and I think, again, going back to what I was saying about it feeling cold and all that, I think the way they perform the sex scenes, and you have to call them sex scenes or erotic scenes, because you cannot call them love scenes. You cannot call anything these characters are doing as passionate in a romantic sense. It's all just animal instincts and like arousal.
It's not even, that's the thing, it's like not even passionate. There is a sex scene in this movie that is filled to the brim with what can be classified as dirty talk, but like it's so clinical, it's so like using like all of the proper terminology, and like they're getting into it, but like from an outside perspective it feels so just like reading off of a script page, and not in that they're acting poorly, but it just feels like that's the intention, that they are just saying these things because it's how they feel about the entirety of it.
Yeah, they're very disconnected, and I think that tone and that way of like the audience not feeling passion from it, I think is very intentional. I think like what Cronenberg's trying to do is make us feel as neutral as possible, so we can actually just analyze these people rather than getting caught up in the excitement. I think the last thing he seems to want with this movie is for us just to get into the horniness of it and just enjoy it on that level. I don't think that's what he wants.
I disagree in the beginning. I think he does use it in the very beginning to draw us in and like engage with it on that level, but then very quickly he starts pushing the boundaries and getting it further to the point where you're right, nobody should be able to really associate with that, and therefore we have to disconnect ourselves.
I mean, okay, first couple of scenes, but I think as soon as it's clear that the sex isn't doing it for them and they're clearly bored, I think from that point on, like nothing you know, nothing is designed to, like, obviously, the very first scene of this movie, one of the first things we see is like the bra comes down and a boob comes out. Like that's like one of the first images we see in this movie. So which made me laugh out loud, just because I'm like, Cronenberg, you're like, never change.
Yeah, horn dog.
Dear. Music also has kind of a sort of darker tone to it. It does kind of feel like we're voyeurs, like the music, the filming style, all of it kind of creates this feeling of like we're seeing something we're not supposed to be seeing, and it's making us a little uncomfortable. If there's any emotion we feel intentionally, it's uncomfort.
Yeah, obviously it works very well because we are so focused on cars, but a lot of the cinematography is done either through windows or aimed at mirrors. So it provides that level of disconnect again of saying, oh, you're not supposed to see this. It's blocked off from you as an audience, but you're still watching it.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously, it goes without saying here, but there's a fair bit of nudity in this, if that's something that you're concerned about. Which,
what?
feels like a weird thing to say, given everything. That said, no male nudity. So, guess you could critique and say that he should have...
Yeah, it's... Again, I don't want to get into spoilers here, but it's weird because, to an extent, it's actually a little bit ahead of its time when it comes to, like, male sexuality in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also very shy to actually show anything as compared to the female form. So it's a bit hit or miss on that.
Part of me wonders if that was, like... We won't even get an NC-17 if we show...
We're just going right in front of Congress if we do that.
So yeah, maybe that was just like that was the line where Cronenberg's like, fine, I won't push it, but rather than it being like him being like, I don't know, conservative. It feels weird to call Cronenberg conservative, but just in the context of that one decision.
Yeah, well, it might be that the producers and the studios and whatnot were like, okay, look, we're willing to let you do a lot under the name of Cronenberg, but like even we need to be able to see a return here.
They knew who they were in bed with. Come on now.
Apparently he didn't even change that much from the source material. So as soon as they optioned the book, it should have been like, oh, well, we're doing this now.
Yeah, but that means they can immediately give notes. And like someone can read the book and go, right, don't show anything like this in this scene and so on. Yeah. That said, though, it is very provocative. It is very explicit in a lot of ways. It does push these boundaries where it's not even so much that there's sex happening and that you're seeing a fair bit of nudity or whatever. It's more just like the situations that lead to the sex are so like taboo because it's like, oh, you're inspired here to have sex because you saw a car wreck where someone got hurt. You shouldn't be excited by that, and yet you are. And like that's the kind of thing that feels like, oh shit, I feel like I'm seeing something really weird that I shouldn't be seeing, and I'm getting a window into like a person. And then this idea that there's a whole group of them that kind of get into it, and they're all like involved, and they all have these feelings, and it is this idea that's kind of spreading like a drug that's addictive, and like it's passed on to one from the other, and whatever. But
yeah, it feels a lot to me like this sort of, every single community, no matter what, has different layers of like commitment and how deep they are into it. Like, you and I are both into like comic books. You got people in the comic book community who have one book, they check out, they get that, and that's it. Like they may only even watch movies or whatever like that. And then as you get deeper and deeper down, you get the people who have very, very strong opinions about a colorist on issue 16 or something like that. Like people in any community have these deeper layers to them. It feels like this is the sort of fetish kind of community. This is the sort of thing where at the top level, you've got something where it's already a little bit hard to break into that just because of the taboo nature of it. The little, it's not something that's in common culture of these people who get excited from things like car accidents or stuff like that. But then you see how many more layers there are beneath it as the movie continues, and how the stuff that we're introduced to that already felt hard to deal with to begin with is just the top of the iceberg, and it gets so much worse as you go further down.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning as well, this idea of like sex and death being related to each other, and the idea that almost dying is the most sexually satisfying thing that one can have. I've brought this up before, I'm sure I'll bring it up again. The French call an orgasm the little death. And, that just seems relevant to bring up in the context of Crash. So
what you're saying is this movie did really well in France.
It probably did. The French probably lapped this shit up. Probably super.
Le Crash.
Yes, that's how you speak French. You just put le in front of whatever word.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. Is there anything else you want to bring up before we go spoilers?
Is there anything else? Not really. I don't think nothing that I would consider to be absolutely spoiler free. So I'm good.
All right. Spoilers then for Crash, David Cronenberg's Crash from 1996. Let's get into it. Oh, how do we?
I do. Please. Before we started this, we were talking about a future recording, and Pete specifically said the words, "Yeah, but I need to be the one that drives the conversation." So, by all means, Peter, drive the conversation. I'd love to see how you explain this one.
Yeah. For the record, I wasn't saying that I need to drive the conversation as that's my job, you don't get to do it. I was saying in the context of I need to remember the movie well because I'm the one that drives the conversation.
Gotcha. But I'm going to take it my way so I don't have to deal with this.
Okay, fine. I mean, if you want to take the ball, if you can take both balls and penis by the hand and you can run with it.
I mean, if you want me to start with something, we get like 3 solid minutes of the slowest credits I think I've seen in a while.
Actually, yeah, probably worth mentioning because we commented on how the title card for Bound was heavily stylized for such a low budget movie. It really feels like a package of like a title suite went out into Hollywood in like the mid 90s, and a lot of these movies wanted to play around with it because we get these like stylized credits that are kind of flying towards the camera and they've got like a sort of light effect on them. It's like, oh, we can do 3D models of credits now, so we're gonna play with it.
Yeah, it felt like all of the technology and stuff that was built for like the liquid metal effects for Terminator 2 had finally just reached the kind of consumer grade where every studio has some version of it and they're like, turn it into a title sequence, let's make it fancy.
Yeah, to be fair, I think this was trying to emulate the feeling of like you're on the road and like car headlights are coming at you, the way the titles were coming at you and the light was sort of like doing a lens flare as they went like towards you.
Yeah, because the lights are just constantly like passing overhead. Like it gave that sort of. I get the feel for it. It's just really, really long for seemingly no reason.
They had a lot of names. That's
true. Yeah,
that's all the reason.
Pack a few more on screen at a time as they drive by.
Yeah, drive-by credits. Literally. All right. So the movie actually starts with Catherine, who's in an airplane hangar. Turns out it's a prop airplane hangar, I think they said later, but
it was a private one.
Regardless, though, this kind of sets up that she's already kind of like got a bit of a fetish for something that's not human, right? Because she seems to be into the airplane, because she takes out her breast and kind of rubs it against like the body or the wing of the plane, whatever it is she's in front of, and you see like hands coming behind her and there's someone there, and I thought it was going to be Spader. I thought it was going to reveal Spader, but then whoever this guy is sort of ducks down into like her legs, and sex kind of starts to happen. We don't see too much here. It kind of goes away, but as in we cut away from it. I mean,
yes.
But it's like, it's just this random guy, and it turns out later he's like just someone who works at the airplane place,
Yeah, I think there's like a tiny little subplot in the background of she is like getting lessons on to how to fly a Cessna or something like that. So probably like her pilot license or something.
So there's like a pair of introductions here, because we get this scene and it cuts to like a TV or film set where James is a producer and someone's looking for him, and it turns out he's in one of the closets having sex with like a camera girl, and it's again, it's kind of a typical sort of scene. He's like, I'll be there in a minute, and they try to have sex. And it's after this scene, again, it cuts away when the married couple are together later, and they're just sharing stories of what they did. And it seems like to try and get excited, they basically have this open marriage, and they get excitement from each of them having their own excitement separately, and then they'll tell each other about it. And that seems to be what gets them going. But this was a misfire, because she says, he asked, like, did he make you come? And she's like, no. I mean, what about you? Did you make her come? And he's like, oh, we got interrupted. And she says, oh, maybe next time. And that's a line that recurs later on, right at the very end. Maybe next time. But it gives this idea of like, the only hope they had of having any passion for each other tonight was if they had good stories to share when they got home. So that, I mean, admittedly, some of that I didn't really get all of until I saw later scenes, but in hindsight, I can sort of accurately kind of say what this is.
It's very obvious at the beginning that they have an open marriage. They are unsatisfied even already, and even just the way it's edited together, these opening scenes, it keeps on cutting like right before things are about to get started, quote unquote, like post foreplay, but pre like just as we're going into it.
I skipped over the wife when we were talking about the cast. Deborah Unger, who we actually saw in the game when we were doing Fincher season.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Because I know her face from something. Turns out it was that. And one day we'll see her in Highlander 3 over on the Atomic Cinema Experiment, whenever that day comes. But
all right, fair enough.
Yeah. So yes, and she was in both Silent Hill movies, which as I was looking through the filmography, I probably said that when we did the game. I'm sure I looked through her filmography then and said the exact same thing. She's in both Silent Hill movies. That's weird. Anyway,
I want to go back and check.
So yeah, so that sets that up, and that night he's driving down the road and has an accident. He loses control. He goes off the little hill into the other road and hits another car, and immediately the driver of the other car, turns out to be Holly Hunter's husband, comes flying through the windshield into his windshield, and he looks over and sees the dead body sitting there, and he looks over at the other car, and seemingly, of course, Holly Hunter was wearing her seatbelt in the passenger seat. And there's a curious moment here that I didn't actually know how to read. Like, I didn't know how to read it as, did she accidentally flash her breast at him? Mm-hmm. Or... And to be honest, given where the rest of the movie goes, I actually think it was intentional, because it seems like she already had this fetish to me.
Yes, and I agree based off the rest of it, but like for the next 10-15 minutes it just felt accidental, because she was just in an accident, and she's not doing anything else sexy. She's just like, bam, take a look at that, and then moves on.
Well, the reason why it looks like an accident, because it plays like she's just moving the seatbelt out of the way, but she's so like, in a shock state that she kind of moves her shirt as well. And it's like, okay, right? But it sort of like obviously brings a suggestive tone to it. But yeah, we find out she knows the leader of the club, the car sex club,
the little community.
Yeah, she knows that guy. She seems to already be well aware of it. To me, it kind of feels like she was already into this kind of thing. And part of the reason why this maybe even happened is that she was encouraging her husband to like take some risks, maybe,
Yeah, maybe. Something. I mean, honestly, her character, because it does not get as much definition later on in the movie, it feels like almost a blank slate in a lot of ways. We get tiny little bits about her, but in terms of history, in terms of her own wants and desires, it's kind of just she's another person in this group.
I mean, no, I think you can read into it a bit more than that. I don't think you're giving it as much credit as it could get, because for one, we find out she's a doctor. We find out that, or we can extrapolate from that maybe the reason why she even got this fetish in the first place is because she was seeing like
treating other people.
Yeah, victims of car accidents. She probably picked it up, which is kind of perverse in its own way. That imagine like thinking of a doctor getting turned on by the injuries they're seeing. That's kind of wild, and like so. This idea that it has no regard for like the people that are maybe the victims and the things that are exciting you is like a recurring thing, and that kind of ties into that. But yeah, so this like sets this up, and it kind of like smash cuts to him in the hospital, and Catherine's sitting in next to the bed, and even their conversation here is so like cold and disconnected, and she's like, oh, the wife of the guy that died, she's a doctor. Maybe you'll see her in the hallways. Kind of, almost implying, hey, maybe there'll be a spark or something.
Well, even then, they're talking about like, oh, I should have gone to the funeral, and then like she responds coldly to that, and then I think the very next line is like, by the way, what happened to the car? Like, what was the car brought in? It was a total like they're treating these things as completely identical in terms of tone.
I also don't want you to gloss over. You sort of said something there that actually had another little bit to it, where she said about I should have got to the. He says I should have got to the funeral. She says, "Oh, they put the body in the ground too quickly. They should leave it out for longer," or something to that effect, which almost suggested she had her own other little weird fetish going on.
Yep.
So
I think it's pretty safe to assume that everybody in this movie already had something going on before all the car crash stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the movie does a good job of like really presenting it as like an almost alternate world, or at the very least, because we never spend time in any characters who are not at least a little bit weird, it feels like everyone is weird. It feels like everyone is in this sort of depraved kind of like, part of the world where they're exploring all this weird stuff together. And again, I'm not kink shaming, but when your kink puts other people at risk, that's when it's that's when it's a problem.
It's really like there's a point later on in this movie where a group of people are all reenacting a famous car crash, and it's weird. It's deadly, it's whatever, but at least every single player in this is doing this consensually.
Yes.
Whereas later on down the road, we get the, weird enough to say this word, non-consensual car crashes, which come off as much worse.
Well, because normally no one's consenting to the car crash.
Right,
it's usually just an accident.
But instead you have one guy who really wants it, and the other person has no idea what's happening.
So, yeah, I like this stuff. He has an awkward meeting where he sees Holly Hunter in the hallway, and you could you're almost tricked into thinking, oh, it feels a bit awkward because this crash between them killed her husband, and maybe that's creating some tension. I don't think she actually gives that much of a shit for the rest of the movie, if I'm honest. But this is also where we get to meet Vaughn, Elias Koteas' character, who I incorrectly assume was a doctor based on this scene.
Same. And I think that was the intention to some extent.
Yeah, well, because even Spader later on is like, I thought he was a doctor. Or at the very least, he thought he was like a medical photographer, I think he said, because he had a camera. And he's like, no, he's not. But, you know, in this scene, he's looking at the injuries that Spader's got. He's checking the knee brace that he's got. He's got this sort of big leg brace on from his like injury. He's got a limp.
I will say I'm not sure how much of this was covered in the movie, but in the original book, it was Dr. Robert Vaughn, a former TV scientist. So
no, he's not. In this, she specifically mentioned his old job. Like when she met him, he was working at like the transportation,
like Department of Transportation,
Bureau or something like that. Yeah. So either way, like it sets this stuff up. And despite the fact that he's a bit nervous about getting back in the car, and that's when he comments on like the traffic seeming more. Oh, actually, not to gloss over, there's a second scene where Catherine comes to visit him at the hospital, and literally when we cut into the scene, she's got her hand under the blanket and is tugging away as she's just like.
I think she's talking about like, I saw the car, it still had blood splatter on it.
Yeah.
And like all this, like she's describing it as if it's coming out of a romance novel, but it's just horrific.
Right. And he just kind of like, after a little bit, he just sort of grabs her hand and sort of pushes her away and says, this isn't working. Like, I'm not feeling it kind of thing. And in this scene, you could almost accidentally read it as, oh, it's because that's a healthy response. He's not into hearing this as you know, he's not in the mood because he's been in a...
My God, I think the guy who's got a bit too many kinks might actually be learning that some kinks are too far. Oops, I was wrong on that one.
Well, it turns out that it's more just that he's just not unlocked it yet, because like he kind of becomes obsessed with the idea of seeing the car again, and he finds out where the car wreck is, where it's been held at some lot somewhere, and he goes there. And he bumps into Holly Hunter's character, who is also there to try and find her husband's car, and she doesn't. But they strike up a conversation, and he offers her a lift. And you know, she even comments on the fact that his like new car is the same as his old car. He literally went out and bought the exact same color and like make of car. But this entire sequence ends with them going to, apparently quiet for that time of day, the airport garage, because she's going there to do some work, medical work, but it's related to the airport. And they have sex in the car. And there's kind of like a running theme in this movie, actually, of like sex starting. Not every time, but it happens like 3 times, where it starts with the woman pulling out one breast, having the man come in to touch it, and then it progresses from there.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I had no idea how to do so. Like, I don't... Like, the first time that it happened is the very, very initial scene. Like, the very first thing that happens in the airport is she just pulls down her bra and we get the one breast. I don't know, maybe it's just, it was in this movie during, like, the weirder parts, and therefore it just all around was unsexy. But looking back on it now, like, this is just a blatantly not that sexy thing to do, period, I feel like. Like, this just feels kind of, like, so weirdly casual and whatever, of just, like, here. Like, I don't know. It just struck me as weird watching back, even just now, these scenes of how unsexy it feels just on its own.
Like, I mean, the movie's so cold that I agree it doesn't really work in the context of the movie, but, I mean, it could be sexy. Like, someone you barely know just, like, pulls down their bra and, like, looks at you like, touch it. Like, you're telling me that wouldn't be enticing and exciting?
Not after watching this movie, no.
Like, I mean, on its own, in a vacuum, I think it could
I
be
get what you're saying. I think this movie just poisoned my mind a little bit. I think that's all it is.
I mean, to me, the way I think it worked in this movie is that it was, and admittedly, there's lots of ways you could do this, but I think it was around motif in this movie as like a literal kind of extension of like an invitation. It's like, hey, how does a woman specifically, obviously, how does a woman specifically make it clear they want to engage in some sort of sexual activity? Like, you can't get any clearer than whipping one of the boobs out and being like, go for it. Like,
I mean, you're right. I you know what I think it is, like, watching back these scenes? It's the absolute, like, blank stone face that it's always accompanied with, where it's just like, there it is, where it's like, okay, and I feel like you're going to stab me if I do something about it.
Yeah, obviously, yes. In a sexier context, I would expect a look of horniness on the face, I suppose. But I think what it works about it here and what they're going for with it feeling so cold and that blank face is that idea that, like, even she is not necessarily 100% confident or comfortable with, like, this fetish she has, and it's this journey of discovery. Like, think of it about the awkward way of, like, two people having sex for the first time, where obviously in theory they should be excited and horny because they're having sex, but the first time you're a bit nervous, it's clunky or whatever. You're not necessarily feeling just the raw fun of it because you're too busy thinking about, oh, I'm doing this. Like, I'm actually doing this. I think that's kind of what you're going for here to some extent, is there's kind of like a, and I think typically when you portray sex kinks in movies, especially when you're doing something a bit more extreme, like a BDSM thing or whatever, there tends to be like a sort of serious kind of attitude presented with it. I guess because I don't know, because some people, I think, get into the idea of not showing affection during sex. That makes it more exciting for them.
Right.
I mean,
you and I both sat through the entire 50 Shades of Grey, and that was stone-faced the entire time.
Well, for us, I mean, arguably they shouldn't have been stone-faced, but I guess the direction of the acting was kind of letting them down there a little bit.
Yeah, just a bit.
So, no, I kind of get it to an extent. I always feel it feels almost a little nerve-wracking analyzing sex scenes like this, because you don't want to feel like you're revealing something. Right?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
About yourself. Like, at any point, you may just say the wrong thing that implies something about yourself.
It's the sort of thing where, like, and then, during this scene, they get a tattoo or whatever like that, and, like, that was just the sexiest thing I've ever seen, right? You agree, right? That was definitely sexy, right?
Oh, dear. But yes, I'll be on the record, a woman exposing her breast and saying, come and get it, I would find attractive. Okay, I admit. Lock me up. I'm a weirdo.
Fair enough.
Anyway,
I don't even know where we're at, because that happens like 2 or 3 times. So this
is the Spader and Holly Hunter in the car, and they're at the airport. Honestly, I saw people walking about in the background. So I mean, to be fair, as far as blatant sex and like broad daylight in public goes, this isn't even the most extreme this movie gets by any stretch.
Not even close. I mean, she did say it's less busy during this time of day, not it's a ghost area.
But to be fair, like, honestly, as far as like normal like fetishes goes, the excitement of maybe being caught because you're in public is actually relatively a normal thing in terms of not as normal that everyone does it, but normal enough that people are aware of that being an exciting thing for someone.
But see, that's the thing, is like, obviously the wife brought that up at the very beginning, saying like, oh, I was in the airport hangar and I could have been caught at any time. But this felt less about that and more about, we're in a car. Like, it felt like the car was the bigger part of that.
It felt like that's why, like, she was excited, because I think, again, the direction here when she's in the car talking to him the entire time on the way to the airport, it's like focusing on her hand, it's focusing on like these angles of like, just various parts, her legs even, and him looking, and like it's paying attention to all these little details that if you were in the scene and you were feeling sexually frustrated or aroused or whatever, you'd be like paying attention to these details. And it kind of focuses on that. There's a
thing where Spader, the entire time during the drive up, he's like fidgeting with the seatbelt.
Yes.
Like it's restraining him back, and he's like, oh, you know what, screw this, I'm taking it off, and he just flings it off. But like, obviously that just goes back to the idea of, if we crash, I want to feel something. I don't want it to just be a nothing experience. I want to feel it.
Yes, I'm confident no one in this movie uses a condom.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm confident.
Not. You kidding me?
Luckily, the car crash fetish community is relatively small, so as long as none of them get anything, they'll probably. I mean, obviously, pregnancy's still a risk, but yes, that's a.
Look, the only rubber they want to see is on the tires.
I'll title the review that. Very good. I won't, but it'd be funny.
I'll come up with another one. We also failed to mention, I mean, you might have mentioned, I might have just been distracted, but the whole reason that they were so psyched up to have sex in the airport garage is because they almost got into a crash on the way there.
On the way, like, he just, another, it's not even his fault, another car kind of like comes out of nowhere and he has to swerve and he loses control for a little bit and it's kind of exhilarating and it kind of leaves them in this, oh wait, that put us both in the mood. So, they end up, just having sex in the car. So, and what's funny, because they've established already at this point about how, like, their individual sex lives lead to their married sex life, is that almost the very next scene, I think it cuts to it, is him having sex with Catherine, and it looking like, they're into it. Like, this seems to have worked. Like, him having this excitement with her during the day has then reverbed into having this excitement with her at home, which is why Catherine gets more drawn into this stuff as well as the movie goes on. Because she wants to, like, have him pursue this further, because the more he pursues this and feels something, the more she feels something, and then she directly gets involved herself. So, like, it's a whole domino effect of this stuff. But this then leads to, like, okay, next time we see them together, and unless there's one other random sex scene, but I think the next prominent scene with them together is Holly Hunter takes him to this show, right? And there's bleachers here, so there's like a whole crowd that's there, right? Like, so we get this smaller community that we focus on for the rest of the movie, but there is a crowd here that are here, maybe not for sexual reasons, maybe it's just because they're car freaks or whatever, or they're whatever.
This is the merging of the car fetishist community, the true crime community, and the James Dean community.
Yes. So I was very confused here, because you see Vaughn, and he's like sort of leaned over at a car, and he's speaking kind of slow and soft, and I'd almost describe it as seductive. Yeah. But then he sort of like stands up a little bit, and you can see that he's speaking into a microphone. So, like, for context here, this scene starts in this like relative close-up of just him next to a car. You don't know anyone else is there. And then he comes up into frame and he's holding a mic, and I went, wait a minute, why is he holding a microphone? Who's this being broadcast to? And then sure enough, there's this bleachers full of an audience, and he's standing with this car. It's this Porsche. He's like, this is the same Porsche that James Dean died in. He said on that lonely road in Northern California that one night that, oh, don't worry, he'll see us. He's got to see us. But of course, that other driver did not see him, and James Dean got his neck broke.
It's such a pre-rehearsed, like, monologue. Like, it feels like he has done this 100 times, and yet simultaneously he is still just as passionate about it as the first time he ever said it.
Yeah, so basically what they're here for is they're going to reenact the crash, because he's got a stunt driver in the other car, and then he's got his other friend is also a car fetish sex freak. Yes. Who's going to drive, and he's going to play the passenger of the James Dean car, because there was a passenger at the time. And
it was like a mechanic or something. And
after a build-up, they just sort of like, split apart far enough and drive into one another and crash. And there's like a little moment of where James Spader's like, hey, is he actually hurt, or is this just part of the show? He's like, oh, you never know with Vaughn. And that kind of becomes a running thing throughout the rest. He's like, does Vaughn actually have a death wish and just wants to die in a car crash? Or is it just about getting close and then getting the sexual satisfaction of, coming close to it or whatever? Right. But the police show up because obviously this is illegal, right? This is not a thing that should be done.
I don't even know if it was the police. It was definitely some sort of authority, but Vaughn said something as they were going through of like, nah, it's not the police. That's just the transportation department. Like, they know who I am.
Yeah. He's been like victimized for his beliefs.
Yes. I don't know why they won't let me near the exhaust pipe on any of their cars. I just don't get it.
So this is where, like, so he runs off with our main couple here, with James Spader and Holly Hunter, and
as well as the guy who was playing James Dean, who probably has a concussion.
Yeah, he's a bit hurt from the crash. And they go back to presumably where Vaughn. Well, he says he doesn't live there. He says this is his workshop. He lives in his car, which had a little undertone to I live in my car. Not because he has to, but because he wants to.
That's the thing. Most people would be like, yeah, I'm living in my car. But he's like, I am living in my car.
It's the only time I feel alive is when I'm in my car. Right, so yeah, we get into this little group of characters here. I mean, we've met most of them at this point already, but the main one is Rosanna Arquette's character, who we find out was in an accident, and we can tell she's injured because she has like 2 leg braces on and like a brace that comes up and around her like her midriff. And the part that felt specifically designed for the movie to me, which I don't believe any brace ever would have this, is the brace actually comes up and around one boob, so that again that motif of the one boob is there again. It's like her brace is designed to always feel like she's offering one boob to whoever comes knocking.
I thought you were going to mention the part of her having a specific little compartment that holds 2 pre-rolled joints in it. But
no, I was
also the one boob for this movie.
Yes. So like he just kind of observes these characters interacting with each other a little bit, and they're already planning their next stunt. Are we going to do this famous actress who died? We're going to do her the crash. And they're excited about it, and they're even talking about how, you're going to be the driver again, the guy that was driving the James Dean car, but it was a woman, so you're going to have to wear a wig. And he's like, yeah, give me big tits, so that the audience can see them like obliterate when I hit the dashboard. And I'm like, this is the most unhealthy shit I have ever heard in my life.
Yeah, it's that was the only part that I thought they were going to like hit on a lot more in terms of fetishizing and like viewing that sort of sexuality angle of it, is that this guy specifically, like, he seems really into the idea of having some big boobs, and like we see later on of him getting his costume sewn up, and he's just sitting there like feeling himself up as they're on there, but they don't ever really deal with it.
Well, I don't think they need to. I think it is just there to sort of like connect to those other like fetishes that come into that community. I don't think. And I say that, I just mean in general, like, more, I don't know, raunchy communities, right? Like the idea of cross-dressing and things like that. But, I don't think it needs to go into it. I think it is just a case of, hey, this is how like it connects to other things you understand. In the same way that the public sex is kind of brought up as kind of a gateway and something that was being used to try and, like, provoke a reaction. But clearly, Catherine's bored of that now. She's probably done that a bunch of times, and it's just not getting the same response anymore. So, but he gets to know Vaughn a little bit here. Vaughn takes him aside and says, hey, look at these photographs. And he's got photographs of all these famous wrecks. He's got photographs from, James's own wreck. He's like, hey, here's photos of you from the hospital. And he kind of dresses it up a little bit and says, yeah, this is a project I've got. It's about, talking about how, like, humans and, like, machines or what, they said something about that, right?
Yeah, it basically just immediately devolves into, like, this is the next step of human evolution. We're all going to have like machine parts and whatnot, and you've got that leg brace thing going on. We got the girl out in the other room who's got her brace thing. Like, this is just the next step. This is what we're all going for.
And I'll say at this point, it's actually wild to me how, like, out of the 4 leads plus Rosanna Arquette's character, those 5 characters, I think we see almost every combination of 2 people having sex out of those 5 characters that we could. The only one, I guess we don't see. The only 2 we don't see is Holly Hunter and Catherine, and we don't see Vaughn and Gabrielle, which is Rosanna Arquette's character. However, obviously, it's heavily suggested that they have been doing it. It's just we don't see a scene of it in the movie.
Yeah. No, you're right. And honestly, I would say if this movie ran for like
another
10 minutes longer, we would have gotten the Holly Hunter and the Catherine scene.
Yeah. So this sets these things up, and I don't remember if we get another scene with Vaughn after this. Maybe we do, or whatever. But I think the next scene that we're really going to talk about is when Spader, because he has sex with Holly Hunter again at one point in the car. Although this time it's not enough anymore, because he says, "Oh no, I'm fine." She's like, "Oh, did you finish it?" No, I'm fine. Just we can do without. But the next time that he's really into a sex scene, and it's probably the most memorable sex scene of the movie.
Well, I'll say the one scene that happens that triggers this is he's leaving his work at the same time as his wife, and they're in separate cars, and then we see Vaughn is essentially trying to terrorize Catherine. Like, he's not actually hitting her car, but he's like speeding up, getting right behind her, swerving wildly. And
Spader sees all of it. He's witnessing all of this. Yeah.
And he's like not intervening really, but then eventually the wife turns off into a parking lot. So does Vaughn. It seems like he's about to go do something, but Spader's car intervenes, gets in the way, and Vaughn just drives off.
That's right. And obviously, like, Spader has relayed much of what's going on and who he is to her. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, they're having sex, and it's a super explicit. It's not that it's the first time there's been like full frontal nudity in the movie, to be honest, but it's very explicit here, where he's behind her, kind of in a spooning position, and they're already having sex, but then she starts like talking dirty but provocatively, right? Where she starts talking about basically the entire subject. I don't know if it starts that way, but it turns quite quickly to the idea of her fantasizing about James Spader being with Vaughn, and saying, "Hey, are you attracted to him and his greasy jeans? And have you thought about his cock? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about doing this to him?" And she keeps asking these specific questions. And it's interesting is he never really responds to most, like, maybe he responds to the first couple of things, but he just gets into it. And he does get more passionate. He does, like, fully enjoy the sex more and, like, satisfy both himself and her as she's saying all these things. Even though I would say that nothing in the movie before this point indicated that he had anything, any kind of gay urges of any kind. And even though later on he does actually have sex with Vaughn, I don't actually think it's because it's satisfying like a gay urge that he had. It was more just about the next extreme in the fetish, as opposed to he always had gay, feelings or like those desires.
Yeah, I think this is, again, one of those things where, all right, we had this system, we had this thing where they are at like the first level on their car crash fetish list, whatever it is. Yeah. And then Vaughn introduced them to the idea of the next few layers.
The danger.
He showed like, here's all this other stuff that you're not even prepped for. It's whatever. And so this scene is just kind of representing that idea of the fantasy of, what if we did it? Like, what if we went that far? Yeah. Like, how hot would that be? And so they both get super into that idea. And it's not until later in the movie that we, like you said, we get the exploration of, they actually go through with it, and is it actually something that they wanted, or is it just like too far for them?
Yeah, because like, it's not too long after this where we do ask the question of like, what if Catherine gets more involved with what's going on between them? I mean, it's not the very next thing, because the next thing we see with Spader and Vaughn is they're driving in Vaughn's car, and Vaughn says something. He's talking. He basically kind of opens up about what he's really doing, and it's more about what he's actually up to.
He more or less admits like, nah, the crap about the next step in evolution, like, that's just to get people in the door. It's really about the sex. Yeah. Like, car crash equals sex. That's my whole mantra here.
And he talks about, he wants to drive, like, in real famous car wrecks, like, actually fix them just enough to be drivable, but not change any of the other damage, so he can just experience driving in a car that's been in a crash, and so on. And he drives him up to, like, a multi-story car park, and there's a prostitute kind of, like, at one of the, sort of levels. And he comes up to her and says, "Hey, how much, blah, blah, blah." And he's sort of negotiating with her, and doesn't exclude that maybe Spader will want some action too, but says, "No, he's going to drive. You'll just be with me in the back seat." So he says, "Hey, you drive." And we get this scene where Spader's driving the car, and in the back, it seems that Vaughn is at least doing a lot of hand stuff with the prostitute.
He's hitting second, probably third base minimum.
Yeah, he's probably going to do more as well. But I was actually questioning, because there was a line, because obviously Vaughn does have some scars from a previous crash. There was a line during the sex scene where the wife asks about his penis, and Spader says something like, "Oh, it's probably damaged because of what happened." Up. And I actually was thinking, because when he's with Catherine later, and it started off with hand stuff again, I thought, okay, is he not actually functioning down? Like, can he not use his penis? And it seemed like he actually did at a certain point, So I think that was just me jumping ahead because I'd only seen him use his hands to that point. But
no, but that would have fit also with like a lot of things we see the character do later on. So yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised with it.
But yeah, so Spader has this provocative night of like watching this happen in the back seat, and we've already had him thinking about Vaughn whilst he's having sex with his wife. So this is like, you know, this idea of like, again, having sex in the car, of it being dangerous, of all these things.
It's just, again, the next level down. We just keep on building with like more and more of this idea of linking the idea of sex and cars together, as well as making it more and more explicitly dangerous.
Yeah, and then the next time, is this Spader's like finishing his day at work, and he goes down.
If I could jump in for one scene, it's so minor, but it is also literally the entire end of Holly Hunter's arc.
Go on, yeah.
So you mentioned that sequence of, you know, they have sex in the car, and she asks if he's going to finish, and he's like, no, don't worry about it, I'm all good. The very next sequence after that is...
Oh, when they're watching the car test dummy footage or whatever it is.
Yeah, they're all just chilling at Vaughn's place, and like all of them are just lightly touching each other throughout the living room as they're watching car test footage of cars just being crashed into.
Not just that, but the tape kind of stops working at a point, and Holly Hunter gets very frustrated. She's like, no, there's more close-ups, so we want to watch more of this. All right, and it's when she sits back down, she's in the middle of the couch, that she starts touching both the crotch of Spader, but also of Rosanna Arquette on the other side, and it kind of emphasizes this before the scene cuts away. And I'm like, wait, are we going to get to the point in this movie where they're just going to have whaled sex parties like in a car together or
I'm
something?
not convinced they didn't already. But no, that's kind of like the end of Holly Hunter. She pops up a little bit throughout this later on, but for the most part, that's kind of the end of her arc. And I feel like having those two scenes right next to each other is kind of indicative of she's not able to, you know, get off with Spader anymore. Spader's moved on to other things, deeper things. And she's frustrated, and it seems like she's not going as deep down the rabbit hole as he is in this path. So she's kind of stuck at this level that she's comfortable with. She's feeling more and more frustrated, and that's just kind of what we see here, is her finding her own stopping point while Spader continues downwards.
Yeah. So Spader gets off work. Catherine's going to take him home, but as that's happening, Vaughn was also waiting outside, and he's been questioned by the police because apparently a car hit a pedestrian near the airport, and maybe he was involved. And we never actually find out if he was or he wasn't. It's kind of left open.
We get some pretty big signifiers, though.
I mean, he probably did, but so there's like, so Catherine's like, hey, do you think, like, and James is like, oh, he's not interested in pedestrians. And, you know, maybe not in a strict sense he's not, but I don't think he's going to swerve to avoid them either, if I'm honest.
I mean, if it cracks his fender, if it does something like that, it might do something for him.
Yeah, so because he looks shaken up, James is like, you know what, I'll go drive him home. Leaving Catherine, who was going to drive James home, kind of just standing there. And as this scene plays out, James gets in the car, and Vaughn like takes off his shirt. He's got a big scar going up his stomach, which Catherine's just staring at. And even though he's never spoken to Catherine before, as far as we know, and he's not said anything to her in the scene yet, he just looks over at her while he's topless and says, "You coming?"
That's a loaded question.
Yeah. And sure enough, you know, cut to them, and she's in the back seat of the car, and like they're both in the front. And before we even get to the sexy part, we get probably what I would call, and this is maybe a loaded sentence given this movie and everything else that's in it, but I actually think this next part where they basically go past like a car wreck, right? And there's like, you know, the medical staff are there, the firefighters are there, like breaking people out of cars. There's a limo that's crashed, right? And it's like a proper big scene with a bunch of emergency services and people who have survived the accident getting patched up and stuff. It's very whatever. I actually think this might be the most disturbing scene in the movie on like a sort of ethical sense, because these people are traumatized. They've just been in an accident. They're being patched up. And just the way that like Vaughn casually goes around with his camera taking photos, knowing that he's excited. Catherine looks around and sits next to a victim at one point, and is just kind of, and she's even starts posing for the photographs for Vaughn when he's taking photos of the car, and like Spader's just watching very intently and watching this like sort of dance play out between them, like sort of knowing that she's into it and knowing that they're probably going to have sex and he's going to be witnessing it. And like, but all of this playing out whilst there's a very real crime accident playing in it. You know, it looks just like footage you've seen of real car accidents, of the, you know, them using tools to break people out of cars and things like that. And the tone and the music, and the almost like dark, dreamlike quality it has just felt like the most perverse thing in the movie, because they were like getting excitement and pleasure of like other people's tragedy, and this is the, obviously all the other things where they're actually having sex is kind of like whatever. Yeah, it's a bit weird, it's a bit what, but this actually felt like, oh no, this is where it felt like a thriller to me.
Yeah, this is the first point in the movie where it's not just them. Like, they're taking this outside the community. It's no longer just the stuff that they do independently on their own. This is the first point where they are taking someone else who is, not a famous person. It's not like a famous crash or anything. It's just people going through possibly the worst moment of their lives and just fetishizing it right in front of their faces. And it's just... I never saw the movie, but it reminded me a lot of what I heard people talking about Nightcrawler, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, where it's just this absolute disregard for humanity for their own purposes.
Yeah, I think between that and between the idea of Vaughn like pushing them further, because I guess I also felt thriller elements as well when he was kind of chasing down Catherine, this idea that he might be a dangerous force that's maybe too far for them. Now, I don't think he actually is. I think they actually welcome his danger with open arms, but that's definitely where I sort of felt the thriller elements kind of like creep in. But yeah, this sequence just felt super perverse to me, and it leads to, they get back in the car. But notably, if you're paying attention, you notice, Vaughn didn't get in the front. He's in the back with Catherine now.
They also specifically have James Spader, like, he's getting out of the car and his hand touches something. He's like, hey, I must have hit something as we were driving, but you got a lot of blood on your car handle and on your wheels and in your wheel well. And then you think back to that sequence of him being questioned by the police. You're like, yeah? Is that really what you got under your wheels there, buddy?
So he's like, there's an all-night car wash near the airport. Let's go there. And as they're getting into the airport, Catherine and Vaughn are making the eyes at each other, and Catherine does the same thing as before.
Single boob.
The single boob. But as this is happening, it's shot really... I love how this scene plays out, though, because you've got this slow... It's a convertible, so the roof's coming in over top, and then the windows go up as it all plays out, and it obscures it more as it's happening. But yeah, like... James sits in front of the car as they're going through the car wash. So you've got this sex scene playing out in a super public place with all the washer stuff going around the car, like all the big scrubbers and whatnot. And they're in the back seat just going for it, like, completely. Like,
it's also implied to be like very rough. Like, he's, got hands around her necks and whatnot, but she seems to be into it for the most part.
Yeah, she like is responsive to it. But when you cut to the next scene and she's lying there completely naked next to James Spader, and you can see like the hand, like it's actually the shape of a hand, the bruise that's on her thigh. And I mean, I actually thought at this moment, is she thinking maybe that was a smidge far? Like, is she maybe regretting how rough that got? Is James Spader regretting how rough that got? Even though he's clearly fine with the open marriage part of it, is he maybe concerned this went a bit too far? But no, given the rest of the movie, I wouldn't say that. I mean, even if they question it here, maybe people who do go down these rabbit holes do have moments where they go, maybe I'm going too far, but then still fall into it anyway.
Yeah, that's, if I'm reading it more correctly, I still feel like James Spader was going down the rabbit hole no matter what, but based off of everything else that happens in the movie, I think this is where Catherine taps out. Not in the fetish as a whole. I think she's still willing to do that with her husband, but I think this is where she says Vaughn independently is not a good, he's just a bit much here, because the next time we see her is as we're going into like the final sequences with her and Vaughn.
The ending, because from here, like the next time he meets up with Vaughn, it's when Vaughn calls him and says, hey, this is important about the project, come see me. And he's getting a tattoo. He's getting a tattoo of like part of a car wreck on his
I didn't get a great look at it, but I thought it was like a steering wheel indented into his chest.
Yeah.
And he was saying that it was a prophecy. So I think he is implying that like he's going to die in a car crash and the wheel's just going to like hit his chest and crush his ribcage, sort of thing. Yeah,
he's definitely got a death wish, clearly. I mean, I think I already thought that, to be honest, but this definitely spelled it out. And he's like, hey, you're getting a tattoo as well. I want you to get this one. And it's like, the logo from the emblem from the car.
Yeah, it's like the Dodge or whatever.
Yeah. And he just looks at the tattoo artist who's just sort of going along with this, but clearly thinks it's weird. And he's like, where do you think this one should go? And she just kind of looks at him. Cut to, like, in the car later on, Vaughn is peeling off the bandage over the tattoo, and it's still bloody, and Vaughn starts, like, licking it and kissing it. And obviously, James Spader's reacting, and he's into that. And then they switch places. He takes the bandage off the big, stomach tattoo that's on Vaughn. He starts kissing that. And, then it clearly goes down a sex, trajectory where they start doing things with their hands, then their mouths.
And then Vaughn flips over.
And then this kind of, I mean, immediately after, Spader kind of gets out of the car and stumbles over because they're next to, like, a junkyard, and he stumbles into, like, one of the really badly beaten up cars, and Vaughn, like, drives in the car at this point and hits him a couple of times. Doesn't actually, like, do any real damage, but is definitely scaring Spader a bit.
Yeah, I wonder if this is kind of trying to play up an idea of, like, power exchange in a lot of ways, because obviously Vaughn was on the bottom side of the exchange during the sex scene, but then here, I mean, he's literally the one who is, pardon the phrase, ramming into James Spader. So, like, there has to be some level of, like, taking back some control there in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, but you could argue even in the first place, like, Spader was doing that almost on behalf of his wife. He's like, I'm not going to be the one that's, like, I'm not going to be the one that's roughed up here. I'm going to be the one in control. I'm going to be the top. Even if he wasn't as rough as what Vaughn was. And then Vaughn is, like, okay with that because what he wants to be rough with, he wants to be on top with the vehicles, which he sees as the more exciting part for him. So, yeah, it's kind of wild.
The only interstitial scene that went on there is we get the what is Gabrielle, the one who has the crazy ass brace that goes up to her chest.
That probably would have happened by this point. You're right. So there's a scene where Spader takes her to, like, a car dealership, and she's just clearly rubbing her crotch against the car. Right, it's so blatant. And the car salesman comes over, and keep in mind she's got these big leg braces on. She's got a cane, right? But she's also dressed. It's kind of like she's modied her braces into what looks like something of, like, a dominatrix outfit almost, because everything's black and
like
shiny.
A lot of extra leather.
Yeah, and so this salesman comes over and is like, "Oh, do you see something you like?" And she's like, "Yeah, I see something I like. I like this one. I want to see if I can fit into a normal person car. Can you help me in?" And, like, makes this guy, like, help her put her leg in, and, like, it's very provocative, but the legs are open and all that, and she's like, "Can you help? My leg's stuck. Can you put it in?" And he ends up, like, ripping a part of the seat when he's, like, trying to force the leg in, and he immediately just goes, "Oh no."
It's such a, I don't even know what the point is. Like, the sequence was obviously just for them to get a rise of, like, doing this out in public, because they start rubbing James Spader's crotch, and then it leads to a sex scene between them. But, like, I don't understand.
No, actually, let's not gloss over that. She starts rubbing, like, Spader's crotch as this guy's trying to force her leg into the car.
Right. Exactly, and that's the part that's getting me, is that, like, they're obviously turning this into a sexual thing of, like, oh yeah, we're gonna force this guy to, like, help us into the car, and, like, that's hot because he has to put his hands and, like, force you to do this. But, like, also his reaction once he tears the upholstery is like, oh god, this is bad. This is really bad. Oh geez, and it's like, it feels really over the top of, okay, yeah, man, you tore some upholstery. It sucks for a model car, but I'm like, you that upset about it?
Well, I think it's probably that he has to pay for it out of his wages, and it's an expensive car. Yeah. It's probably just a money thing. That's all I think.
Yeah, but he got to feel up this woman in the car, so whatever.
Yeah, but then it cuts to her and Spader, like, having sex in the car, and he's, like, moving her legs around to, like, get her into a position, and and
it's, like, so awkward because she is actually unable to bend her leg. So you see him, like, trying to push back, like, past the turn signal lever, and then he bends the rear view mirror just trying to get it in place.
But that's the thing, they're into it because they're both got this fetish for what the cars have done to their bodies. So this is part of what's turning them on, is that their bodies have been changed and, permanently modified by car accidents.
This is not a bug. This is a feature.
Yeah. So there you go. That happened. And then, the scene with her and Holly's after Vaughn's death, so let's get to that.
Okay.
So, Vaughn is... I remember how, like, Spader and that end up next to him.
Spader's just looking out the window, he's just doing his thing, and then the wife comes up and says, hey, someone hit my car. Like...
That's right,
My car is just dented up on the side, I don't know who did it, and they talk for a minute about, like, oh, maybe it was one of your ex-lovers or whatever. But then they come to the conclusion, we think it was Vaughn. So they drive out and start looking for him. We also get the key here that there's no more traffic. Like the roads are empty for whatever reason, which symbolically I'm sure means something. And then as they are a bit tired, they want to turn around, go home. They do finally cross paths with Vaughn, who starts trying to run them off the road.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of traffic by the time this scene ends, but yeah, to start with, I think it's just the idea that their head's clear, like they've got a singular focus now and they know what they're looking for,
right?
Kind of thing. But yeah, like so there's a bit of a swerve and like dodging and like he's trying to ram into them, and this is where it starts to feel super dangerous for any like innocent bystanders because he almost hits someone here, hits another car there.
He rams them into the back of a truck. The truck is unfazed, but obviously it could be a problem.
Yeah. Ultimately, though, he swerves off and goes off like the overpass into the road below. And when you don't see the impact, we sort of follow it from the couple's perspective, and they like run over to the edge and look down, and we see that the car has basically upside down, just basically wedged into the middle of a bus. And it's not like there was no other innocent victims, because we see someone walk out of that bus on fire. Like, someone is on fire from what he's
like, they
just
show
done.
a lower down shot, and they show a dude, like, head bloody, still in the bus as the car's on fire as well. So it's a bad time.
Right, but he's got to die the way he wanted, right? Like the other characters never even seem sad about the fact that he's dead, because he's just achieved what he wanted. And I think this is where like the comparisons to being addicted to drugs really, like this idea that he didn't care who he destroyed on his path for euphoria. He got what he wanted, and that was it. That's all he cared about. So there's nothing to like
grieve
for him. Like he did just, he didn't throw people under the bus, but he definitely impaled the bus.
Yeah, if this were like old Viking times, he would have been the warrior's death in Valhalla. Like, he died, even if he went out taking God knows how many people with him, he did it in a glorious way, and they're all very happy for him. Oh, that was one thing we glossed over that I was going to bring up. That accident, the one that felt like really perverted and like gross, that they were taking pictures of it. Turns out that it was that dude who was helping with the other stunts. He was actually the one who caused it. Yeah,
the one who was dressing up as the woman for the next race, because he was in the wig when they find him, which basically suggests that just like Vaughn at the end, like got other people injured or possibly killed by doing this stunt to kill himself. This guy also had this death wish and wanted to die in a glorious car accident, and who knows, like, how many people died in that incident. So that was the capper on that scene. I can't believe we sort of. It's because it sort of like goes by so fast, and there's so much interesting weird stuff to talk about with the main characters that I just kind of blanked on it. But you're right. You're right. Same. So like that, like, and then there's a scene after this where Holly Hunter and Rosanna Arquette's characters like go to the lot where the car that he was driving, right? Vaughn's car is in the lot now because it was in this accident, and they find it, and as they're looking at it, they just start touching each other and then get in the back seat and start having sex. And like, so, and I actually laughed a little bit here just because, this is like one of the last combinations of these characters that we hadn't seen together yet.
This is where you get your bingo card out and you're just like, hey, I did it.
Because obviously we've had James and Catherine, because of the married couple. We had James and Holly Hunter. We had James and Vaughn. We had Vaughn and Catherine. We had James and Rosanna Arquette. And then we've had Rosanna Arquette and Holly Hunter. So the combinations...
Yeah, I mean, there's an implied Vaughn and Gabrielle as well.
Yeah, they've definitely had sex in the past. There's no question.
So yeah, like there's literally only the one combination, which would be Holly and Vaughn in any meaning. Well, I mean, they even had some heavy touching, didn't they?
Yeah. Oh, Holly and Catherine, though. That was the other one that we didn't get.
Oh, right, Holly and Catherine. Yeah.
But you never know.
It could happen.
So it's just showing that, these people still feel this way. They're still excited by the fact that he died this way. And the final... After a little bit of a conversation on the balcony where she says that her playing lessons are almost done, the final...
I thought that was going to lead into an entirely different type of crash.
The final sequence of the movie, though, is that they're driving in different cars on the highway. It's broad daylight, right? And they're on the busy roads. And he is chasing her down and trying to ram into her. to, I guess, recreate the thrills of Vaughn, given the thrills when he was trying to chase her down in the car.
He's also still using his car.
Yeah, he's using. Yes, that's right. Because they specifically go to the lot and like request to like get it and like get the forms for it. And the guy's like, "What could you even possibly do with this?" Cut to him driving this beat up car, just like Vaughn said, where hey, get it running, fix it enough to make it work, but nothing else. So it still feels that you're in this car that's been wrecked. And he's chasing down Catherine, and part of me thought, okay, like, how do you end this movie? Like, I guess you could end it in a tragedy where maybe, like, she dies in an accident that he causes and then he actually maybe feels bad about it at the end or something. You could do that, but that's not the obvious way to end it, right?
That's not the Cronenberg way.
Yeah. But sure enough, yeah, like, he drives her off, like, the road and she goes down a little hill into, like, a ditch. And it's very similar to how he went off the road at the start of the movie. And when he goes offside, he doesn't look worried, but he sees her lying. And notably, she's lying in such a way that her skirts kind of come up so you can kind of see like some crotch. So it's very provocative, even though she's like at the side of a car that's now upside down.
Yeah. Like at the end of this movie, they do a pullback shot and show the whole thing. And it's like the least sexy possible way that you could shoot this. But they're still playing like it's sexy.
But I think that's the point, though.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. So, like, he gets down next to her, and I thought, is she dead? Is she, like, paralyzed? And he's still going to have sex? Because I thought this movie might be ending with her being paralyzed from the neck down and him still having sex with her.
I wouldn't put it past it.
But she does start moving her arms and stuff. So, I don't know, she is still kind of whatever. But she's, so obviously she's a little bit, like, out of it, or she's bleeding a bit. And he says, did that work? And she's kind of indicates...
Are you hurt?
Yeah.
And she says, no, I think I'm fine.
And then he says, to quote what she said at the very start of the movie when they weren't excited by their sex that day with their separate partners, he says, maybe the next time, maybe the next one. And then, like, has sex with her there. And all I could think was, like, this is broad daylight and the car's went off the road. People are going to be watching and calling the services here. Like, but
this only exists pre-camera phone for a very brief period of time.
So the camera pulls back as they're having sex next to the car, and it's just the ending is kind of bleak in the sense that no, they still have this desire. They're still going to put themselves in danger, possibly other people in danger, with no regards. And this idea that the next step in the thrill is for her to actually get in, because he it wasn't like a bad injury. He still had a limp the whole movie, and it was almost like, oh no, like. He wants her to get at least some sort of injury from a car accident to like get
this
something
permanent reminder sort of thing.
Because we didn't even talk about how much they emphasize, like when he was having sex with Rosanna Arquette, she had like a big nasty scar on the back of her leg, which he was like looking at and licking, and like we kind of glossed over some of the grisly details out of decorum, out of some class. But
out of YouTube already not going to be happy with this season.
But it is, it's important to mention that there is like that's part of the fetish here is like his like affection for the injuries and the wounds and everything. So
no, absolutely. The one thing I wanted to mention though about that crash scene is just to further imply that she is still definitely into it, is that as she sees him coming up like on the road behind him, she undoes her seatbelt.
Yeah. So does he as well. They both sort of undo their seatbelts as if like, no, we have to take the protection off, otherwise it's not exciting. It's not thrilling.
I'll wear a condom if I have to, but seatbelts are a no-go.
So I mean, it's a challenging movie to discuss and like I feel like. Hopefully we've balanced making some jokes and being silly about it, but also actually trying to kind of talk about it and say what it's actually maybe getting at. I do think it's a window into the dark side of humanity. I think that idea of Cronenberg's fascination with like how people are obsessed with sex and like body horror and like desires and treating that in like various different ways, like in that Cronenberg lens. I do think a lot of that is here, and it feels like it is. Maybe the most like just raw sexually potent movie that he's done, in the sense that a lot of his other movies have these themes, but this is the one that's just about the fetish and the sex, and everything else is kind of like just a facet in it. Whereas in a lot of his other movies like Videodrome, there's a lot of grotesque symbolism, or The Fly, where there's a lot of grotesque body horror happening, and the sex is there as a theme, but here it's very much at the forefront, and it's very much like in your face, and we're going to be provocative, we're going to show it, we're going to whatever. So
yeah, I mean, I will say I opened up this review with saying that I think that, you know, it was a bit for the sake of shock value, and I stand by that. I think that it was for the sake of shock value, but I also think the shock value is kind of the point.
There's a purpose. There's a purpose to the shock value.
Yeah, it's not like it's doing it just for the sake of like, look how edgy we're being, and look, you know, this is going to be the movie that it's talked about of like, oh, it was banned in 73 countries or whatever. Like, no, it's done with the idea of that sort of dark mirror on humanity of showing, yeah, like there are this level of depraved people out there. Maybe not in this exact same way, but when we talk about addictions, when we talk about this spiral into just losing your humanity for the sake of hedonistic pleasure, I think that that's, you can't sugarcoat that. You can't provide that dark mirror and also not present it as horrible as it truly is. So I think I appreciate a bit more post talking about it, but it is still something that as I was watching it, I did just have, I think, any purposeful, like Cronenberg was purposefully trying to have me distance from it. And
I also think what I want to point out here as well, overall, is that it kind of prevents it in a very matter-of-fact way. It would be very easy to put in a character who's there to be normal and react to what they all are. Right? It'd be very easy to have a character say, oh my god, you people are awful, or disgusting, or this is depraved. And while I think it's probably fair to judge some of what the characters in this are doing, it very much just leaves it for the audience to be like, make their own conclusions about what these people are and what they're doing. Like, because it would be very easy to have normal characters react to it and be disgusted or pass judgment in some way. And it feels like, as much as that we're saying this reflects the dark side of humanity, it's kind of been presented without any kind of like bias in a weird way. It's like, hey, this is just a thing, and you know, think about it. And
if anything, it's showing, you know, just by nature of the acts how grotesque and like how dark they are, but it's also providing that idea of, but here's why they're into it. Like it's allowing you to at least get a glimpse into the idea of, you know, same sort of thing of like people. One of the biggest ones for me is like foot fetish. I don't get it. I have no idea what the appeal is. I personally, that's not like anything for me. But if I were to apply this sort of movie's lens on that, it would just allow me to get into that mindset, to understand at the very minimum what the interest in it is. Pretty much any Tarantino film, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you don't share Tarantino's taste for feet. Yeah, I think, like I said at the start, it is a car crash of a movie, and that you can't not like have your attention be held by it and just be kind of in awe of what the characters are doing and where they're going, and like being anticipating how far it'll go and how it'll, you know, pardon the phrase, climax. So, you know, on those levels, I think it succeeds in a lot of ways, and I think it is very well directed, and it always looks great. Like, in terms of cinematography, I mean, like, it always has like a distinct style, and it does create a mood and an atmosphere of being in a depraved world with these depraved people. And maybe depraved is even a harsh word to an extent, but you get what I'm going for there at the very least. So, yeah. So maybe this is a weird question given this movie, but David, what was your scene of the movie?
See, this is going to be the thing that identifies any latent kinks that I'm not aware is not publicly accessible. I don't know. What would be the scene that... Honestly, it's going to sound like a cop-out, especially as we were talking about it so much, but I do think it was the drive-by photography scene. I think that having that moment that felt like this is where they officially crossed the line. This is the moment where you're getting other people involved who have no part in this. They have no interest in this whatsoever. And you're just almost to an extent making light of their situation. And then again, to find out as the capper to all that one of their own is the one who caused it to begin with is just kind of a little extra punch to the gut on that. So I think that whole sequence,
I think it goes beyond making light. I mean, it's at the point where they're just straight up enjoying what's happening to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would even be a little bit less to just say like, okay, I'm photographing these people because they're, you know, having a tough time. Like, you could theoretically say that like any journalist would do that and it would be acceptable. But then he has Catherine come in and start posing with them, and like that's always in bad taste. I can't imagine that being good in any form.
To be fair, though, we know why he wants these photos, so it's like we already think it is if I wouldn't say anyone taking photos of a scene like this is depraved. Like, maybe I don't want to be the one doing it, but I can understand why there might be a reason for it. If nothing else, for insurance purposes and like sort of investigating why the accident happened and like, real reasons why you would want photographs of this thing. But we know that's not why he's wanting them. He's wanting them because he's going to jack off to them later, and that's a very different thing. So, all right. Yeah. Honestly, I was thinking probably the same scene. I mean, if I was to pick anything else, like, I'll say this: a lot of the scenes stick out, and you remember them because they are very provocative and sort of push things. I mean, I guess maybe like the scene where Spader and Rosanna Arquette and they're at the car dealership. Like, I appreciate that scene almost has more of a sense of humor compared to everything else, even though they're still in effect like using a normie and like having him be a part of their sex game, which is obviously probably problematic in sense of like he's not consenting to be part of some weird sex game. It is at least slightly funny because he's not aware of what they're doing and he's uncomfortable, and there's at least it's a bit more harmless than anything else they do with other people in the movie.
In terms of somebody who's attracted to car crashes, this is by far and away the least possible thing they could be doing. If I had to pick a little second honorable thing, just as I was clicking through here, the opening part of the James Dean crash reenactment, where Vaughn is just like sensually rubbing against the car, being like, "This is it. This is the last words he said." That really got you introduced to the character in a very engaging way.
I was like, man, Casey Jones has went through a rough time since Ninja Turtles.
Yes. I would love to see the little timeline that got Casey Jones to this.
Oh dear. All right, MVP of the movie.
Again, I feel like a cop-out, but like it's got to be Vaughn in my eyes. I think that James Spader is there as more of an audience avatar. Like, obviously he goes deeper, but he's very passive in what happens to him rather than what he actually does himself. And the exact opposite of that is Vaughn, who is going around and he is making these big choices. He is pushing the main character. He is doing things that are absolutely unbelievable in a lot of ways. And he is by far and away, I think, the plot of the movie for the most part. I think that he is the one who makes it all happen. So I got to give it to him.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's maybe pivoting into just his purpose in the story a little bit rather than just sort of celebrating how good the character is in terms of performance, in terms of being captivating and, all those sort of qualities. I do think he is a pretty major choice here. I could also argue Catherine, I think, to an extent, because I think I enjoyed her performance a little bit more than Spader's, just because her kind of attitude, but then also her being the one that maybe actually reaches some sort of limit, and also kind of like we get learn so much about them as a pair through her reacting to his sort of new adventure and all that kind of thing. I do think her scenes where she's getting more involved either by talking about Vaughn or actually meeting Vaughn in person and being involved in the whole the photography scene, all of that stuff lends a lot. I'm probably still going to pick Vaughn, but I do think like she'd be next on the MVP list.
And honestly, that's what I was saying at the beginning of, I think there are two main characters in this movie, but I think that people would argue whether or not it's Spader and Catherine or Spader and Vaughn. I think that there's a very strong argument to be made for both.
You could just say it's a threesome. I mean, why?
I mean, yes, but at the same time, like, I don't know. It feels like if you view it through one lens, then the other one is just less true. Like, it doesn't feel like all three of them coexist on the same level. It's like a weird 3D space going on.
You're putting yourself in this box yourself. I'm giving you an out.
I'm stating my truth. I'm doing what I'm just happy that we hit one this season since Basic Instinct, where it hasn't just been this movie sucks.
But what are you talking about? The last two were good.
Yeah, but remember, I came at it more negatively than you would have liked, and we've had all of these arguments about that.
I know, but I'm making it clear now. I thought Last Seduction was good. I thought Bound was great.
Yes, so I know, but I'm just happy to come into this one and be like, it's definitely something that I was keeping an eye on.
I'm just making. I have had more successes this season than not. Single white female is the only one that I have outright been like,
Maybe I'm just not as horny as I think I am. Maybe that's the issue here.
Just not doing it for you anymore.
Yeah, it's just the single boob. I don't care anymore.
All right, what are you rating Crash?
Hold on, I closed out my scores page. I don't know. I mean, I think that this one is it's a very well-made film. Again, as we didn't talk that much about the technicals, but I do think that it was a very well-made film. If I had, my biggest critique, as I was saying there, is that it's just kind of an expose sort of movie rather than a plot-based one. Like the fact that the third act gets triggered because they're like, hey, we think Vaughn crashed into my wife's car. It's not that big of a deal, all things considered, from a plot-based perspective, but in terms of uncovering the layers of this strange fetishistic community, it's an interesting turn of events where things get to go too far there.
It's just not that type of movie. But I will say, though, that it does have momentum because it's someone that keeps going further down this rabbit hole of the next layer of so there, it has something else instead of the plot to drive it, which I think is a credit to the story structure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why I was saying I was still able to give it my attention. If it was just a random ass collection of scenes of just this guy, touring across America, interviewing people of their fetishes of car crashes, I'd say okay, well, can we get a little bit of a through line? But this clearly had a through line to it. It just wasn't a typically structured plot.
I forgot you gave Last Seduction a 4.5. You absolute madman. And you gave Bound a 7. What are you saying? This is the first one you've enjoyed since Basic Instinct.
I mean, that's fair. Bound was... I can't remember exactly what I said for Bound, but Bound had a lot of enjoyable moments to it at the very least.
Bunch of stupid shit, probably, based on this conversation.
Yep, absolutely. So no, I think for this one... I think this one feels like a solid 7 to me. I can't put exactly why, but it's definitely in the good territory. It's definitely something that I think it's not something that needs to be seen, but if you have an interest in this kind of movie, like the Venn diagram of overlapping Cronenberg and then also just erotic thrillers, yes, I think this is worth checking out, but it's definitely not a need to see one by any means.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a tough one to rate because I don't know immediately how I feel in terms of a score, right? And I don't even after talking about it, I still don't know if I feel particularly confident. It is extremely well made. I do think it is constantly captivating and keeps your attention to what it's doing, and it does feel like you're getting a window into a very specific and unique set of characters. I think I'm willing to go to at least a 7.5 based on this viewing. It's the sort of thing where I might even appreciate it more in time and maybe sometime rewatch it and be like, you know what, this is doing all that great stuff. But I will say it is another very interesting addition to Cronenberg's catalog, which there's a couple of things he's done that I've not really liked that much, but this is not one of them. This is still definitely this was intriguing and memorable, and I'm glad this type of movie exists where it isn't pulling punches and it has something to say, and as for whether it makes the cut,
I mean, I'll put forward my ticket. I think that it is on a little bit of the lower side for me, but it still is very much firmly in the makes the cut category.
Yeah, I agree. I'll have to argue with that then. That's fine. It makes the cut. I think it's unique enough. It's not for everyone, and I would say if it sounds like something that you would feel uncomfortable watching, I mean, you should feel a little uncomfortable. That's kind of the point. But if it sounds like something that you're really going to be uncomfortable, then by all means, just skip it. But
this is one of those movies that justifies the streaming services little trigger warning things that pops up in the corner. This is absolutely the justification for that.
Yeah, for sure. So there you go. That is Crash. Next week on the Collector's Cut, our penultimate episode of the 90s erotic thriller season is going to be Wild Things, which I somehow haven't seen before, even though I'm definitely sure there was a time when I was like 12 or 13 where I'd have been dying to see this movie for reasons that will be discussed next week.
Do they involve Neve Campbell?
More Denise Richards at the time.
Denise Richards, fair enough.
Yeah. And that's not like an attraction that stuck with me as I've grown up, but certainly in that sort of like 10 to 13 range, she seemed like the most beautiful woman on the planet to some extent.
I get it.
So yes, we'll see. That's a 1998 movie, I believe. So we're going up there in the 90s, and that is the second last episode of the season. So we're coming towards the conclusion, the climax, if you will, of 90s erotic thriller season. So, of course, if you want to support the show and get bonus content and help keep all the podcasts coming, including this one, the science fiction podcast, the Atomic Sim Experiment, the horror movie podcast that I did with Tim, Screams After Midnight, you can do that over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonus shows for your trouble, including 2 monthly shows that me and David do. One is called Criterion Cut, where we do movies from the Criterion Collection, and one is where we talk about some of the worst movies of all time. And you can find things like Neil Breen movies on there. Or I don't know. Is Jim Cat out yet? That was recent.
Yeah, that actually just went out last week.
Jim Cat. That sounds like a fun time, or at least fun to hear about people complain about.
I was gonna say, sounds like a fun time is very different from actually being a fun time.
So yes, go check out that, or you can do it via YouTube membership if that is a more convenient way of doing so. I will just mention here a little note on this. If you are thinking of joining the Patreon, do not use the iOS app to sign up. You can still use the iOS app to access your account afterwards, but Apple add a tax onto the prices, so just use a different browser or any other means to sign up on a different device or whatever. So that is the show, though. Yeah, that is Collector's Cup. Thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and if you can get it, is there a way I can turn this into a traffic pun?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It's always nice to have Drive-O-Matic. No, there's nothing. I can't think of anything that sounds like diplomatic.
Just go with it, man. Just say it. This episode will now be 2 hours long until we think of one.
Is that a gear stick in your car? Or are you just happy to see me?
Nailed it.